Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into an idea that I hope is going to resonate with at least some of you, if not all of you, especially if you're feeling stuck in your midlife journey and uninspired and unsure about what the next step of life is going to look like for you. And I'd like to frame this a little bit metaphorically, if you will, around a rebranding. I know you're like, I'm not a corporation, I'm not a company. But let's just look at this from a broader perspective. I know it does sound a little bit corporate-y, but please hear me out. And if you like what I have to say, remember, you can like, you can comment, you can subscribe, and you can share. I appreciate that as we grow this community of midlifers taking on some of our challenges. So let's kind of step back and look at companies, corporations, and branding and what that can look like. The one idea that comes to mind for me here as a Canadian anyway is our big national banks. And I've seen a number of them over the last decade or two do really big rebranding campaigns. So their logo shifts, the way that they market shifts, they're trying to appeal to different demographics clearly, messaging shifts and all of that stuff. So those are kind of obvious ones. And then more globally, we might look at companies, corporations like Apple. You know, Apple's amazing at how it markets and how it's an innovator and a leader in the product lines that it creates and how it's always iterating and slightly changing and evolving, right? Similarly, in the sports athletic wear kind of domain is Nike. And look at how powerful they've been as marketing behemoths, really for decades now. But it could be something a little bit simpler. It could be your local coffee shop and how sometimes they may, do a refit, if you will, changing things up. So every so often, companies do need to look at a rebrand of sorts, right? They want to stay relevant. They want to reach new audiences and realign themselves really in an evolving economy with an evolving mission of who and what they are, sort of keeping up game. Now, imagine what would happen if they didn't do that. If companies didn't stay relevant. And one that comes to mind for me, it's quite a good example actually, is Polaroid. So as the digital era of photography moved forward, Polaroid, for whatever reason, didn't really jump on the bandwagon. And once a very strong leader in that industry, where are they now? Right? So this idea of lack of innovation, lack of rebranding. And believe it or not, these same principles apply to us as humans. And midlife is the perfect time to do a rebrand. That's my thesis. To define who you are, what you stand for, and frankly, where you're headed. So let's start with some common misconceptions here. A lot of people think that midlife is really a time for winding down, a time to start sort of like, ooh, maybe like shutting off the engines and go into gliding mode and just kind of glide into the runway and settle down and glide into retirement, if you will. But what happens if we take that approach, gliding into retirement? Well, a lot of us will stop striving, we'll stop growing, and in many cases, we'll begin a decline. Studies show that stagnation in and after midlife can lead to decreased health outcomes, depression, sadly, suicide, and even a shorter lifespan because of health outcomes. So think about it. Do you want to spend the next 20, 30, or possibly even 40 years kind of coasting? Or do you want to use those years to become an even more vibrant, fulfilling, and having a life full of purpose? The truth is, if we're not moving forward, we're actually moving backward. Rebranding yourself is a way to ensure that you're moving forward. So why rebrand? Well, let's look at the corporate world for a second. Companies rebrand for a few key reasons, right? They do want to gain market share. They want to appeal to a new demographic. They want to align with their core mission, and they want to stay ahead of their competition. But let's now look at that from the midlife perspective. The reasons aren't so different, are they now? So we want to rebrand because we want to redefine who we are. We want to connect with new opportunities, new people, new ideas. We want to align with what really matters to us. And we want to recognize that staying the same isn't necessarily serving us anymore. The big question is, what do you want to become? Who do you want to become? Take a moment to reflect on that. Like, who do you want to become? We often just let life kind of move us forward. What about pausing and doing the reflection, right? Are you still trying to be that person you were in your 30s and 40s and struggling with that, right? Because it's not the reality anymore. And it may not even feel authentic. Or are you ready to embrace the person that you're meant to be now? And I know that can be confusing, but this is what's ahead of us, figuring it out. So start by imagining your future self. What do they do? How do they spend their time? What values guide their decisions? And this vision of you that you're imagining right now, this is the starting point. This is how we begin this journey of rebranding. Let's look at some tools. We do need to use new tools. As a coach who works with midlife people, I'm always saying that the tools that got us to where we are now, all of our successes and obviously some failures in there too, are not going to work going forward. They're the tools of that first stage of life. We need new and different tools now. Here are some steps maybe to get you started. A first one is reflection, right? So this really looks at taking stock of what's working in your life currently. So a really honest and authentic audit of what's working and what isn't. And be brutally honest with yourself when you do this. Sometimes we sort of pussyfoot around and don't accurately nail things, right? Or identify things. Think of visioning. So get clear on what you want your new self, your rebranded you to look like. Upskilling. Are there areas where you still need to grow? Like just because we're at this stage in life does not mean there isn't room to continue to grow. In fact, exactly the opposite. We need to grow in new and different ways. So maybe it's learning a new skill, developing more emotional resilience, or diving into more personal development. I'm a total champion of personal development throughout life. Let's look at networking as well. So reaching out to people who can support you in this initiative, in this shifting, in this rebranding. So is it mentors? Is it coaches? Hello? Or are your peers are going to be supportive of you? Experimentation. So be willing to give things a try, and they're not all going to work, and that's totally okay. We're not as invested now as we may have been in our 20s and 30s, where it's like, oh my God, I got to figure out my life. Same here, but you already have a foundation to build upon, right? It should be a little less stressful. And sometimes you won't know if something works until you actually test it. Give it a test run, just like a car. Are you going to like it, or you get in it and it doesn't feel very comfortable? So how will you know if it is a success, if you are moving down the right path? Well, I would suggest if you've got some clear goals that have some measurable outcomes, that's a good starting point. So, for example, what if your rebrand is kind of about career growth, shifting in terms of where you're at? You might feel plateaued or stagnant. You might measure success by landing a new role, or maybe it's starting a new business. Oh my gosh. Or if it's about personal growth, that might look like doing some deep work into relationship building, for example, or maybe it is better health outcomes, or maybe it is tackling some of those limiting beliefs, or simply having a greater sense of peace. I say simply, that's not a simple one, but having a greater sense of peace. The key really here is to define what success means to you. And again, be authentic about that, be real about that. It has to have a deep resonance, right? So let me give you a few examples of why rebranding at midlife may make sense. I'm clearly making the case for it, right? So think of the lawyer who felt completely drained by his career, and his rebrand involved some shifting from the type of work he was doing into another variation of that work that he really enjoyed, which was mediation, where he could use his skills in a way that felt more aligned with his values. And in that transition, he started to thrive. Another example is someone in the tech industry, an executive actually, in a leadership position, who shifted from the tech world into coaching. And it required a bit of an upskilling and a mindset shift, but the payoff was incredible because she ended up being much happier and playing a more impactful role in the lives of many people. So what about you? What would rebranding allow you to do? And how could you serve and be different or from the brand that you currently are? Rebranding yourself in midlife isn't about pretending to be someone you're not. It's not what this is about. It's about becoming the best version of who you already are, growing from where you are into the next iteration of yourself. It's about shedding the old, the stagnant, the parts of your identity that no longer fit, that no longer suit you, and stepping boldly into you and into your future potential. So, who do you want to be? And what's stopping you? The time to rebrand isn't tomorrow or next year. It's today. So if you found this compelling, if you like what I had to say, if you think that rebranding might be helpful for you, make sure that you send a little love so you can like, subscribe, leave a comment, share. And yeah, if it's of resonance to you, share a comment with me and I'll follow up and maybe we can have a conversation. But let's keep this conversation about midlife changes going. It's beautiful and it's necessary. All right. I'll talk to you next time.